Hey guys, I've got something interesting for you all today. This is the Raspberry Pi 400. This is a keyboard computer which is effectively a Raspberry Pi 4B inside a sexy, cute, white chiclet style keyboard. Now you can buy the Raspberry Pi 400 on its own, but I've got the personal computer kit which comes with a matching mouse, HDMI cable, power cable, beginner's guide, etc. So this was only announced yesterday morning and I ordered as soon as I saw the announcement. And I'm glad that I did because this is going to be extremely popular. It's sold out most places already. Hopefully it'll be in stock by the time you watch this video, but this is going to be popular because this is an interesting concept and I think it's something that a lot of people would like. So what I'm going to do in this video is just talk about its features, its pricing, and just talk about generally what Raspberry Pis are all about. And then I'll do an unboxing and then hopefully I'll be able to open up the casing and show you what's inside. And then I can load it up and we can have a quick look at Raspberry Pi OS, formerly known as Raspbian. You can, of course, put many different operating systems onto a Raspberry Pi. There's lots of variations of Linux and Unix, and you can actually put a version of Windows on there as well. So please do check the description area for the video timeline. It's going to be a long-ish video, so please skip to the area which is relevant to you. But without further ado, let's learn more about what this is all about. So this is the Raspberry Pi 400, your complete personal computer built into a compact keyboard. And this is a variation of the popular Raspberry Pi 4B. And I say a variation because there are a few slight differences. The biggest one, I guess, would be the CPU. So in the Raspberry Pi 4B, it's a Cortex A72 and it's running at 1.5 gigahertz. This one appears to be 1.8 gigahertz. So yeah, a little bit of a boost. Now, when you bought the 4B, you could pick between 2 gigabytes, 4 gigabytes, or 8 gigabytes of memory. This version, the Raspberry Pi 400, only has 4 gigabytes. I say only. 4 gigabytes should actually be okay for most people, but it is worth noting. I know there's a lot of people saying, why didn't you just put 8 gigabytes in there? But it is what it is. So for the benefit of those of you who don't know what a Raspberry Pi is, Raspberry make a lot of different variations of the Raspberry Pi computers. They're cheap, they are affordable, they're versatile, and they're low powered. And these can be used for so many different things. Yes, you can use it simply as a computer, but people use these for so many different things, literally hundreds of different things as far as security, cameras, weather stations, home automations, social media, everything. What I'm using it for and what a lot of people use it for, this is a Raspberry Pi Model 3B. What I used it for was to play retro video games, and inside this tiny little computer is pretty much every video game until 1995. So this is the Model 3B. But things have moved on since then. We do have the 4B now, and that's basically what's inside the Raspberry Pi 400. Now, like I said, it is looking like it's going to be sold out in most places, but for reference, obviously prices change around the world, but here in the UK, it's about £67 for the computer alone. It's about $70 in the US, I believe, and it's about $100 in the USA for the kit. Here in the UK, it's about £94, and as you can see, it's sold out already. Now, if I bring this over to my overhead camera, I just want to quickly show you the ports in the back here, but we'll be looking at this soon. You can see you've got the GPIO header, so that's important. It means that you can still expand this, you can still, add Pi hats, etc., and use this in many different ways. You've got your micro SD card slot, 2 micro HDMI. Full HDMI would have been great, but there you go. USB-C for power, 2 USB 3.0, 1 USB 2.0, which is good for a mouse, etc. Gigabit Ethernet, Kensington lock there as well. Now, this does have Bluetooth as well. And if I zoom down, you should be able to see some of the other specifications. Going the wrong way. So, if you look at the specifications there, the specs show that with the 2 micro HDMI ports, you can actually support 2 4K monitors. It says, well, supports up to 4K 60 frames per second. H.265 is the 4K 60 frames per second decoder, or the encoder. And you've got H.264 for 1080p as well. It's only 5 volts for the USB-C connector. Inside the box, this is what we're going to be looking at. You've got the computer, the mouse, the power cable, SD card, HDMI cable, beginner's guide. Now, of course, that is a micro SD card and an adapter, and that is a micro HDMI to HDMI cable. But after this quick summary, let's stop messing about. Let's get this opened and we'll see what the Raspberry Pi 400 is all about. So here we go. This is the Raspberry Pi 400. Let's see what's actually inside the box. There's the keyboard and the computer itself, not just a keyboard, remember. And wow, that looks beautiful. That looks absolutely beautiful. I really like the color scheme. Keys look nice. It's light and it does feel plasticky, but it feels well made as well. You know, it feels good. The Raspbian logo there. And on the back, you've got the expansion port there, and you've actually got the OS in there already. It's not separate. That's what comes with the beginner's kit. It's a SanDisk card. You see that there? And yeah, it just looks good. USB 3.0 is blue, obviously. Looks really, really nice. So this is exactly what you get when you order the personal computer kit. You've got the Raspberry Pi 400 itself. You've got the memory card, which is actually inside there already, the SanDisk card, and you've got an adapter so that you can put it into your memory card reader. You've got the official Raspberry Pi beginner's guide. It's really well made, actually. It's a nice little book. Gives you a better understanding as to what it's all about. Now, this will use the Raspberry Pi Model B mostly for examples, but it's a great little starting guide and it'll give you a lot of ideas as to how you can use this. We've got the micro HDMI to HDMI cable, and it's quite well made as well. Now you can buy a 2-meter cable, but this one is only 1 meter, but it's extremely thick and it looks durable. And then we've got the USB Type-C power supply adapter, and we've got the mouse. So this is the power adapter, and stretching out on my desk, it looks about 1.5 meters. And if this zooms in, focuses properly, we should be able to see what's on the adapter there. Output 5.1 volts, 3 amps, 15.3 watts. And the last thing to open up is the Raspberry Pi mouse, which I need to cut open. Here we go. This is the sexy little Raspberry Pi mouse. And kind of feels cheap if I'm honest, but it does look good. It does look good. I quite like the fact that it comes with the separate boxes for all the different components. You know, it's good that everything's packaged this way. So again, mouse, memory card, the computer itself, beginner's guide, HDMI cable and power cable. But yeah, that's exactly what you get when you order the personal computer kit. So let's do the official boxing weigh-in. We'll see how much this weighs. So the Raspberry Pi 400 is weighing in at 385 grams, which is 13.5 ounces. So when I opened the box up, I was really captivated by the design of the Raspberry Pi 400. It just looks stunning. But once you lift it up, what really grabs your attention is its weight. And it can be difficult for someone in my position to really demonstrate how light or heavy something is. This is weighing in at 385 grams, and my usual keyboard, the one that I use with my main PC, is 868 grams. And yes, it does have this extra little area at the side, but this does not have a computer in it. The Raspberry Pi 400 does, and it has its computer just in there. So the Raspberry Pi 400 looks great, but let's have a quick look at what it looks like when you've actually connected cables up. This is the official power cable, Type-C, and you can see the light is going on already. This is the official HDMI to micro HDMI cable. And lastly, we've got the official mouse, which has a very, very short cable, but kind of works, I guess, because you don't want it to be too far away from this. Put into the USB 2.0 port. Of course, you could use a Bluetooth mouse as well if you want to save that USB port. So for most people, this is kind of what they would have. You know, they could maybe lose this cable if they had a wireless mouse. But yeah, this is what you would have. Power, output to the monitor, and the USB mouse. If you don't want to use Wi-Fi and you want a faster connection, you might want to go for gigabit Ethernet, which goes in there. I know I'm messing with the color scheme here, but this will show you kind of what this will look like at your desk when all the cables are connected. So if you're a fan of Raspberry Pis or just microcomputers in general, you're probably curious about what's under the hood. How did they fit a full Raspberry Pi inside this thin and light chassis? So let's find out. Now, if you look about the casing, at first glance, there isn't really anything obvious as to how this is put together. There's no obvious like open here or anything like that. It's actually sealed really, really well. But if I zoom down, hopefully I can show you what I've discovered. So if I show you that, can you see that there? There. So there's lots of parts like that and that around the chassis. And essentially what I'm hoping to do here is just pry these parts open in order to take the casing off. And that's how we're going to get this open and see what's in there. Okay, here we go. So it looks like it's connected. The ribbon cable is connected, so we just have to take that off. So I've disconnected the ribbon cable and we can now see the keyboard chassis, and you can see the LED lights there for power, the caps lock, the number lock, etc. What becomes apparent here is that there is a little bit of flex here when you take it off. It's bowing a little bit, but I wouldn't put too much pressure on it. It is liable to break. And if you don't believe me, look at the bottom half of the Raspberry Pi 400. Clearly, when I was prying this open, I applied a little bit too much force. And yeah, if you're doing that, have the glue on standby. But it should be a little bit clearer now where all the parts are, where you have to pry it open. You can see there's, clasps all around the casing and you just have to push it open. But yes, you could be unlucky like me. So I glued a clasp back to the case and a second one, which had been damaged as well. And it kind of stands out next to the other clasps, but it's actually quite strong there. And I'm sure it'll be a non-issue once the case is back on. You won't be able to actually see that part. So this is the bottom half of the Raspberry Pi 400. And this is where all the magic happens. This is where all the components are. And it's dominated by this huge metal heatsink plate, which is being used to dissipate the heat from the components underneath. Now, when I opened this up, I was a little bit perplexed as to what this adhesive pad was for. And I incorrectly assumed that it had fell off and it was supposed to be for the chip at the other side. So I moved it over to the other side, over the chip at the other side of the case. But I wasn't sure, so I looked into this issue and I came across a teardown article for the Raspberry Pi 400 from Jeff Geerling. And he mentions this issue and he said that he spoke to a Pi engineer and the engineer said that this pad is required to bond the ground from the back of the keyboard to the rest of the Pi's 400 electronics. So it looks like it was in the right place. This pad is supposed to be basically resting next to the gigabit Ethernet port, the USB port, and the casing here, and it bonds it all together. So yeah. Thankfully, I clarified that. So I need to open this now, and there's 4 screws here, and I've had a little try at them already. It seems to be the J00 driver bit for the screws, and some of the screws were actually quite tight, and I'll be honest, these screws aren't great. So just be careful you don't thread them, and make sure you use the right screwdriver before you start applying any pressure to these screws. And hopefully you will not cause any damage. So you can see there's 4 here, very, very simple. Not a lot to say about this, quite small. I'll put this little adhesive pad to the side again. I'll make sure I apply it back again later. And quite sticky, but that's because of the thermal pad, no doubt, onto the CPU. And here we go. So that's what was keeping it down there. That was holding the heatsink into, well, keeping it together with the case. And this is it. This is the Raspberry Pi 400. This is the computer itself. It's quite amazing that all of this is hidden inside the keyboard chassis. So effectively, they've rolled out a Raspberry Pi. The component board is a little bit thinner than what you would normally get. Obviously, this is a 3B, but it's a little bit thinner than a regular 4B circuit board, but it's obviously longer, which makes sense. They've obviously used the space that they've got. And yeah, it's interesting to see the components here. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of hackers and modders that are looking at this and they're thinking, well, we could add this here, and I don't know. There's not a ton of space there, to be honest. You could maybe add one little thing or two little things, but I'd be concerned about messing about with the thermal performance and airflow, etc. for, you know, for things like that. And I would just utilize the GPIO header in the back if you're going to do any expansions. But yeah, it's interesting to see how it's all put together. It's quite basic when you see it, and you know, it's just a plastic case and then the circuit board. But yeah, that's it. So putting it back on will be a relatively simple affair. You just have to line up the screws, screw it on, reattach the ribbon cable to here, push it back down obviously, and put the case back on. So it was interesting to see exactly what was inside a Raspberry Pi 400, but I think for most people there's no need or any real desire to do that because the GPIO header port is at the outside, it's at the back of the keyboard. But for the benefit of anyone who is planning of opening it up and playing around with it, what I would say is that it's fairly easy to get it open. You just have to spend some time prying it open with, you know, something like that to try and get under there. But just be careful with the amount of pressure that you apply to it, because clearly I put too much pressure on there. I used a little bit too much force, and yeah, those little clasps break very, very easily. It seems like a weak point of that whole chassis. I mean, the actual build quality is good. It's okay for, you know, a plastic shell, but those parts break off very, very easily. Another thing I would say is that the 4 screws that secure the bottom part of the computer, those screws are easy enough to get off, but there's also a high risk of them threading. The screws aren't the best, to be honest. And I guess one mistake I made there was not replacing those screws with something a little bit better. So the screws aren't the best there, so just be careful when you're taking those off, and just be careful when you're breaking apart the shell, because there is a high risk of you having to break out the glue. But let's move forward and let's have a look at the Raspberry Pi itself. Let's go through the installation process first, and then we can have a look around and see what Raspberry Pi OS is all about. So this is Raspberry Pi OS, formerly known as Raspbian, and it's the official software of Raspberry Pi. Now, if, like me, you buy the personal computer kit, you will get a 16GB micro SD card with this software pre-installed. It's called Noobs, and it comes with this memory card adapter. And they've simplified things by putting the memory card directly into the computer, which means that when you buy the computer kit, you simply turn it on and you will see this. Now, if you're looking to save money, or you simply don't need the power cable, the HDMI cable, etc., you'll have to flash the image yourself. And it's very, very easy to do that. All you have to do is go to the official Raspberry Pi website, go to the downloads page, and there's instructions showing you how to flash Raspberry Pi OS onto any micro SD card. And they show you for Windows, for Mac OS, for Ubuntu, etc. Very, very straightforward. I'll leave a link to that. I've actually published a guide about this years ago with the Raspberry Pi Model 3B. It's very, very simple. So this is the installation process, and this is what you should go through at the start. Now, you can just go up and have a look around. You can see all the different sections here, but it's probably best to go through the installation process when you first load it up. So it's coming up with British English here. British English, use English language, time zone, London, all of that seems good. Next, enter a password. So it's saying that the desktop should fill the entire screen, but you can see here there is a black border around. So I'm going to click this so that the next time I restart it, that black border should be away. And I just need to select Wi-Fi now. So now it's saying that there could be an update. It's reading the update list, and what have we got here? So it takes about 10 to 15 minutes to download the updates and then install them. But once you do that, this is what you see. So I'm going to restart the computer because, as you saw earlier on, the screen wasn't going to the edge of the display. And hopefully that's going to be resolved now when I load this back up. So let's see. I can't actually see it now because my monitor isn't showing it. Here we go. It's loading back up. Come on, load up. It's interesting to see this, obviously, because earlier on I did not watch this process. But this is how quick the Raspberry Pi takes to load up. And here we go. This is it. And you can see that, like it said, the border has disappeared. So now that I've downloaded and installed the available updates, I can show you Raspberry Pi OS. And it is, without doubt, one of the most user-friendly operating systems out there. At the top left-hand side, you can see the Raspberry Pi icon. That will bring up lots of different categories for applications. To the right, there is the browser, which in this case is Chromium. There is also a file manager, which will bring up there. That's the file manager. And that's Chromium that's been loaded up. And you've also got the command prompt as well, the terminal. And you can see the trash folder is up there as well. And the terminal is something you will get used to because when you're making modifications and installing things, you might have to use that. Well, you will if you're making a lot of modifications. Now, at the other side there, you've got the Bluetooth menu, which if I remove my webcam for a second, I'll show you better. So you've got the Bluetooth menu there. You can deactivate it, and then you've got Wi-Fi. Now, I do have Ethernet connected right now, but it seems to have went to Wi-Fi instead. And you've got volume and you've got the date. Now, it's relatively easy to operate this. I mean, if you go to the top left, you can see all the different categories. You've got a lot of different programming applications. There is an education app. There is LibreOffice, which is one of the best free alternatives to Microsoft Word. You've got internet there as well. And of course you can, install different apps for different things as well, for media or for browsing the web, etc. VLC is pre-installed. Graphics, there's just a host of great free applications and software that's been pre-installed. And there's lots of different things there as well. SD card copier, diagnostics. Preferences, there is Raspberry Pi configuration. Now, I just want to quickly show you this because you can change the way that you boot into Raspberry Pi. You can see that network at boot, do not wait, login as user Pi. You can actually boot to the command prompt, the terminal, instead of the desktop GUI. So there's lots of cool options there, and it gives you great control over, how your Raspberry Pi 400 works. So there's a lot of options there. There's too much to cover in this video. I will do a future video, but one thing I do want to show you all and want to test is the speed of the internet connection. Now, if I jump back over to my main PC and I jump over to fast, you can see that I get a very fast connection. So I've got a 900 megabits per second connection, and it kind of varies between 600 up to 900, depending on what time of the day is, etc. But that is through my existing network card, through my main PC, the one that I'm using to record this video. But what am I going to get? I've got too many mice here. Too many mice. If I jump back to the Raspberry Pi, and I'll do the same thing. Now, as I said, I'm going to just briefly, I'll show you this actually. I'm going to briefly just take out Ethernet just in case there's any mix-ups there. But I'm going to rely on Wi-Fi, and we're going to do the same test. Now, through Wi-Fi, we're not getting a fantastic connection. Now, I will say at the top of the house, through my wireless network card and my main computer, I probably get about 300 megabits per second because I've not set up a lot of access points yet. But clearly, the Wi-Fi card in the Raspberry Pi 400 isn't amazing. Now, I'll do another test and then we'll try gigabit Ethernet. Now again, granted, part of the reason this is a lot slower is because I'm using Wi-Fi and I'm at the top of the house. But even with my phone, and I'll do that just now. So this is with my phone at the top of the house, and you know, just with my phone, I'm getting like 100 or so there. So that's with my phone, and that's giving you a good comparison with my phone compared to the Raspberry Pi. So if we jump back, what I'm going to, in fact, I'll show you just now. We'll put in the gigabit Ethernet, put that in just now, and then we'll jump back to the Raspberry Pi, and we're going to turn off the Wi-Fi, but we have that gigabit Ethernet connection, and we're going to run it again once it's actually assigned some IP addresses. Okay, here we go. So obviously this is not as good as what I was getting with my main PC, but it is showing that you can get a fast Ethernet connection with the Raspberry Pi 400. You know, these things are always going to depend on your own internet connection, etc. But it's pretty good to see that you can get, you know, up to a couple of 100 megabits per second. Wi-Fi is nothing to shout home about, but you know, for a device such as this, I don't think it's going to be a big problem. So, wow, we're up to 350 megabits per second now. That's pretty good, actually. Quite impressed by that. Obviously, it's not as good as what I was hoping. Gigabit Ethernet, I wanted gigabit, but yeah, that's what we're getting. That's what we're getting with the internet connection. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I hope you've got a better understanding as to what the Raspberry Pi 400 can do. But please do not consider this to be a review, because I've only used this for one day. I've not tested thermals, I've not tested performance, and there's a lot of things I still need to learn about this. So consider this an unboxing and a first look. That being said, I think we know what to expect at this point from Raspberry. Raspberry are known for producing good hardware. They provide lots of updates, and there's a lot of community support. They're versatile little devices that you can use for pretty much anything. So I'm quietly confident that I'm going to love this little computer. Now, there are a lot of reasons to stick with the 4B rather than the 400, and it's, you know, it depends on the project. It depends what you're going to do. Even myself, there's lots of things that I think, you know, a typical 4B would be better. But I do love this idea of having the integrated keyboard. I think it makes a lot of sense in a lot of situations to just have the keyboard integrated into the Raspberry Pi, because what you normally do anyway is connect an external keyboard anyway. So it just makes sense. The actual keyboard it's okay. It's beautiful to look at. I don't think it's the best keyboard I've ever typed on, not by a long shot, but it's a nice keyboard. And you know, if you're just doing it for some light editing and doing some coding, I think it'll be fine. And I think most people will be happy with it, but they probably could have did a little bit better there. As far as performance goes, as I said, I've not really tested anything there. I showed you the speed before. As far as gigabit Ethernet and Wi-Fi, I think the Wi-Fi could be a little bit better. Gigabit Ethernet was not too bad. You know, browsing around the web here gives you a little bit of an idea of performance as far as what you can expect. Obviously, this depends on your internet connection and all that as well, but yeah, it's usable. It is usable, and as I was saying earlier, Raspberry Pi OS is without doubt one of the most user-friendly operating systems out there, and you can obviously flash any OS you want onto it as well. Now, as far as what to go for, £67 for the Raspberry Pi 400, I think is a great price because of what this can do, the integrated keyboard, and just what you can do with a Raspberry Pi. And a lot of people will have a micro HDMI cable already, or they'll have, you know, the power cable, and they'll have micro SD cards. So it just makes sense to buy this and, you know, buy the keyboard on its own, buy the computer on its own, and just pick up the accessories that you need. But I did like the idea of the kit, and I think a lot of other people would as well. You know, getting the OS pre-installed does save a lot of hassle when you're setting it up. You just plug it in and you're good to go. The official mouse, it's a short cable. It kind of feels cheap, but it looks great. And I would say about the micro HDMI cable as well is that it's very thick and durable. I would have liked to have seen a 2-meter cable though instead of one. Kind of nitpicking, but a 2-meter cable would have been a little bit more practical because it means you don't have to use extenders or switch the cable. The Raspberry Pi book, it's a nice little bonus. This book is about £10 to buy on its own, but you can download it in PDF format free of charge. So if you want, download it to your tablet or your phone, just read it there. But I'm going to state the obvious, but it's just kind of nice to read something in a book format, you know, just sit and read it. And a lot of this is aimed at kids, but there's a lot of interesting things here that will teach you a lot about using a Raspberry Pi. And, you know, it's been a few years since I've actively messed around with the Raspberry Pi, and it's going to be good for me to sit and read this and try and learn a lot about that. So I will do some videos in the future, and I will try and learn more about this, and I'm going to just be playing around with this and trying different things with it. Overall though, as I was saying, Raspberry Pi 400, great little piece of kit. Great little piece of kit, and I'm really looking forward to playing around with it. It would have been good if they maybe made it a little bit easier to open it up and change things around, etc. But again, I'm nitpicking. For that, you know, price, this is just a fantastic little computer. It really is. And I'll be showing that in the future. I'll be showing you exactly why this is a fantastic little computer in the future. This is not just Raspberry Pi OS. This is not just what the Raspberry Pi is about. It's all about changing things. It's all about modding things. It's all about installing different things and using this for your network or for security or for cameras or whatever. And I'll do that in the future. But thanks for watching, guys. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope you've enjoyed looking at the Raspberry Pi 400. If you've got any questions, please do leave a comment below and I'll do my best to answer them when I can. But until next time, thanks for watching and take care.